Drop the bag right now." That was the first thing I heard right in my ear, way too loud for a quiet little aisle full of vitamins and cough syrup, and before my brain could even catch up, my arm was twisted up behind my back and my shoulder hit cold metal. The bottle I was holding popped out of my hand, bounced off the shelf, and those little white pills scattered across the floor like somebody had dropped marbles in church. People stopped talking, carts stopped rolling, and you know that heavy kind of silence in a public place where everybody suddenly decides they don't want to see what they're seeing. Yeah, that one. My name is Gloria Bennett. I'm 71. I walk with a bad knee and I move slow on good days. And that afternoon at Lakeview Grocers, all I was trying to do was buy joint supplements and soup for my sick grandson. Then this officer, Derek Lang, had me pinned to a shelf like I was a threat to national security. I remember the smell more than anything, that mix of floor cleaner metal and his cologne, and my first instinct wasn't even anger. It was that survival instinct. A lot of older black folks have learned the hard way. Don't move fast. Don't raise your voice. Don't give them one single thing they can write down later as resisting. I kept my voice as calm as my shoulder would let me. "Officer, I haven't taken anything," I said, still staring at those pills on the floor like they were evidence in somebody else's case. "I was just reading the label." He didn't look at my face. Not at first. He looked at my purse like it had personally offended him, shook his head a little and muttered, "Big bag hovering by the meds. I've seen this 100 times. Like he was narrating a documentary only he could see. Across the counter, the pharmacy tech. This young white girl named Kayla, who always printed my receipts with a smile, stepped forward so fast she almost knocked over a display. "Sir, I've been here the whole time," she said, her voice shaking but not breaking. "She hasn't put anything in her bag." Derek cut his eyes at her like she was a mosquito buzzing in his ear, didn't even turn his head all the way. "Ma'am, step back. This is a security issue," he said, in that low, sharp tone cops use when they're really saying, "Do you want to be next?" People did that thing I've watched all my life. The quick glance, the half step away, the silent decision that their receipt and their dinner plans mattered more than speaking up. One man whispered, "She's old enough to be his mom," and his wife tugged his sleeve and steered him down the next aisle like he was a cart. I moved my right hand very slow like I was underwater, still holding that vitamin bottle where he could see it. "It's for my knee," I told him. "My grandson's home with a fever. I'm just trying to get out of here." If you've ever talked to someone who's already decided you're guilty, you know the look he gave me. His jaw clenched, his eyes not really seeing me, just seeing whatever story he'd already written in his head. Elderly suspect, large handbag, refusing commands, easy arrest numbers met, you know what I mean. "Open the bag," he said, and I did what I always told my kids to do if they ever ended up in a situation like this. I moved slow. I narrated my actions. I reached for the strap. Then out of nowhere, he barked louder this time, loud enough for half the store to hear. "Hands off the bag, stop resisting." And that one word hit harder than the metal shelf resisting. I'd seen it in so many files tied to so many grainy videos of people not moving at all. I'd spent years of my life trying to prove that word was being used like a magic spell to justify whatever came next. And here it was being thrown at me over a bottle of joint pills. Before I could even tell him I wasn't resisting anybody, he clamped down on my wrist and yanked my arm up higher, spun me so hard my chest slammed into the shelves and my chin bounced off the metal edge. My bad knee buckled and I let out a sound I didn't even recognize as mine. Somewhere behind us, a man's voice cut through the air. "Hey, easy, she's an old lady." And then it faded because Derek turned his head just enough to let that badge catch the light, and I guess that was enough to shut him up. I saw the little red light on Derek's body cam blinking on his chest. And out of habit, the old version of me woke up a little, the one who didn't used to be on this side of the reports. I watched him shift his shoulders, watched his hand adjust the camera, just a notch, so it pointed down at my hands, and the mess on the floor, instead of the angle of his grip, and the way my arm was twisted way past where it should go. I'd written memos about that exact move, slow casual practice, the kind of thing you only do when you've done it before. I'll tell you something I didn't tell the local news at first. For 30 years before I retired, I worked as a strategic analyst for a federal task force that looked at patterns of misconduct inside law enforcement. Not the glossy stuff they put in public reports, the buried complaints, the lost videos, the officers who somehow racked up the same type of complaint over and over and never saw a single consequence. That was my world for 3 decades. Men like Derek were data points on my screen long before he ever laid a hand on me. But that afternoon in that aisle, I wasn't an analyst. I was just somebody's grandma getting hauled out of a grocery store in handcuffs. They walked me out past the carts and the checkout lanes, people staring down at their shoes, pretending to be fascinated by gum and gift cards, and shoved me into the back of the cruiser like they were tossing in a bag of dog food. The inside of that car smelled like old vinyl and stale air. There was a dash cam mounted up front with another red light blinking, and I sat up as straight as my shoulder would allow and looked right into it. Derek caught my eyes in the mirror. "What are you looking at?" he snapped like I'd insulted him. My throat was dry, my heart was pounding, but something hard and clear slid into place in my chest. The part of me that used to live inside windowless rooms full of case files and grainy DVDs. "I'm looking at your record," I said quietly, more to that camera than to him. 20-something complaints in your division shoved into archive, all with the same keywords. He stared at me like I'd spoken a different language, then looked at his laptop, the one they bolt to the front of the car, started typing my name, probably to prove to himself I was bluffing. When that red, restricted federal warning popped up on his screen, his whole posture changed. His shoulders stiffened. His hand tightened around the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white, and I could see the math happening in his head. "Who is this old woman?" "You worked for them," he said finally, not even saying the word, just gesturing vaguely upward, and I shrugged as best I could with my arm in that position. "I used to read reports about officers who did exactly what you just did." I told him I warned people what would happen if nobody stopped them. Thing about the world we live in now, stories don't stay in one room, they leak out through little rectangles in everybody's pockets. By the time they processed me, and then after a whole lot of whispering behind glass and one very tense phone call decided to release me without charges, that shaky phone video from Lakeview Grocers was already bouncing around town. You could hear someone in the background saying, "She didn't steal anything." You could see my arm hit that shelf. You could see Derek dragging me down the aisle like I was a problem he had to move. And you could hear me plain as day saying, "I'm cooperating," while his report later would say the exact opposite. Folks started sharing it with captions like, "Here we go again," and "This is why we film. Older black folks, people my age, just wrote one word, again, and hit send, and if you know exactly how much pain can live inside 5 letters. One of the people who watched that video in his car was a young officer named Noah Ortiz. Rookie still had that fresh shine on him, and when he heard Derek's voice barking in that grocery aisle, he got this look like he'd swallowed a stone because a week earlier he'd accidentally recorded something he couldn't unhear. He'd set his phone on a bench in the locker room to reply to a text, forgot to hit stop, and in the background you can hear Derek joking with another cop, laughing about arrest quotas. "Chief Marshal wants his numbers," Derek says on that audio. You can hear it clear as day. "So I go for the broke black folks, man. They don't bring lawyers, they just cry and sign easy stats." A couple of guys laugh. One says something about playing the game, and you can hear Noah's breathing pick up a little because he knows that word shouldn't be in the same sentence as protect and serve. For days he did what a lot of people inside the machine do, told himself it wasn't his business, told himself speaking up would just get him frozen out, told himself keep your head down. Then he watched me get slammed into that shelf on his phone like everybody else, and that quiet little voice inside him that still knew right from wrong got louder than his fear. He uploaded that locker room recording to an anonymous federal tip portal, sat in his car afterward with his hands shaking on the steering wheel, whispering, "Yeah, I really just did that," like he was trying to convince himself. On the other side of town, Kayla got pulled into the manager's office. They told her she was being moved off the pharmacy for a while, said she shouldn't have gotten involved in a police matter, accused her of hurting the store's reputation for speaking honestly to the reporter who came by. She went home, cried in her car, then wiped her face, and did something braver than she probably realized. See, what the store manager didn't know was that Kayla was the one who handled the overnight camera backups. She knew exactly where the real footage was stored. The wide-angle shot of that aisle, the overhead pharmacy cam, the time-stamped log that showed me reading a bottle, not pocketing anything. She put a copy on a little black USB and tucked it in the bottom of her bag like it was a diamond. And that choice right there ended up mattering more than any press conference. A few nights after everything went down, when my shoulder was turning that ugly purple and every movement felt like glass, there was this hesitant little knock at my door, the kind where you can tell the person on the other side isn't sure they should be there. I opened it to see Noah in plain clothes, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, and Kayla behind him clutching her purse strap so tight her knuckles were white. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "we need to talk." We sat at my kitchen table under that ugly yellow light. Every rental has 3 people who normally might have nodded at each other in passing and never spoken again, and I watched both of them realize who I used to be as I spread out the pieces. I played Noah's recording Derek bragging about poor black folks being his easiest path to his quota. Kayla pressed her fingers to her mouth when she heard his laugh. I opened the copy of Derek's official report. One of my old contacts had quietly slid to me. Suspect refused commands. Suspect pulled away. Suspect attempted to conceal items, line after line that did not match the video, and then I loaded the Harbor Market security footage from Kayla's USB, which showed me doing nothing but exactly what I'd said, reading a label, checking an expiration date, placing a bottle next to my cart, moving slow and careful. "You read this like it's nothing," Kayla said, watching my eyes move across the report. "How do you see all the lies so fast?" I told her the truth. "Because this is what I did for a living for 30 years. I said, I read reports just like this and tried to show the people upstairs that they weren't accidents. They were a pattern." I looked at Noah, this kid who'd risked his career by showing up at my door. "What Derek did to me and what your lieutenant covered for, it's not new." I said, "The only thing new is that this time the right people are watching." I encrypted everything. The video, the report, the audio, attached it all to an email addressed to a civil rights unit I used to brief, and hit send. No dramatic speech, no hashtag, just a simple subject line. Quota-based abuse, urgent review requested. And I'll be honest with you, as soon as my finger left that mouse, I felt both lighter and more afraid than I had in years. It didn't take long. You could feel the temperature in the city go up day by day, not because of the weather, but because people were done pretending they didn't see what they saw. Folks showed up outside Maple Heights Police Department with handmade signs that said things like, "Justice for Gloria," "We are not your numbers," "End quotas now." Some were teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them. Some were elders leaning on canes just like mine. Cars went by honking in support. And inside that building, men who had been very comfortable for a very long time started to sweat. Federal investigators called Chief Marshall into a conference room, played the grocery store footage frame by frame, froze. The second Derek tilted his body cam, then played that lovely little locker room monologue where he joked about targeting poor black residents. After that, they opened Derek's personnel file, and there it was, complaint after complaint, all stamped unsubstantiated, all archived under Marshall's name: excessive force on an elderly man during a traffic stop, harsh language during an ID check, aggressive posture at low-risk scene, the same song on repeat. Next thing you know, Derek walks into the station for his shift and his badge doesn't open the computer room anymore. An IT guy hands him an envelope that says, "Access suspended pending investigation." And all those colleagues who used to laugh at his jokes suddenly find their screens very interesting when he walks by. Yeah, that happened. It could have ended right there if this was a movie fade out on the bad cop getting walked out roll credits, but real life is messier. Pro-police pages online started posting nonsense about me being a career shoplifter from the 90s, with no case numbers, no documents, just low-quality graphics, and a whole lot of "share if you support law and order." Kayla got unofficially benched, told she was hurting the store's image. Noah noticed a gray sedan behind him a couple days in a row, never close enough to be obvious, just close enough that your stomach drops when you check the mirror, and my phone started getting messages that said things like, "You'll regret this." But you know what? Once you've had your face pushed against a metal shelf for buying vitamins, some anonymous email doesn't hit the same. The city council announced an oversight hearing. They asked me to speak, and for a second I thought about saying no. I'm old. My shoulder hurt, and I've spent enough time under fluorescent lights in my life. But then I thought about that aisle, the way everybody went quiet, the way that little word "resisting" hit my chest like a stamp, and I said yes. The day of the hearing, City Hall was packed, every seat full. People lining the walls, cameras from local stations pointed at the front like it was a movie premiere. They called my name, offered me a chair at the podium, and I told them calmly. He bent me over a shelf I can stand. It got real quiet real fast after that. They played the Lakeview video on a giant screen. No commentary, no slow motion effects, just raw phone footage, my body hitting the shelves, his hand pulling my arm, Kayla yelling off screen that I hadn't taken anything, someone else shouting for him to stop, and when it froze on my face, you could feel the whole room holding its breath. I told them what happened in that aisle in plain language, no legal terms, no fancy rhetoric. He didn't see a grandmother trying to buy vitamins. I said, looking right at them. He saw a number. He saw a quota. He saw an easy way to make his boss happy. And the only reason I'm standing here instead of laid out in a hospital bed is because enough people hit record. I asked them straight, if I'd been a white woman in yoga pants with the same bag, do you honestly think this would have gone down the same way? And nobody said a word, but a lot of eyes dropped to the floor. You know what I mean. I explained briefly the work I'd done in my former life, that this wasn't just about my arm or that one aisle, it was about a pattern grown men in suits had been warned about years ago, and I ended with the part I think hurt them the most. That day I did not meet a peace officer doing his job. I said, I met a man who thought my body was a prop for his career. That's not protection, that's hunting the weak because you've been taught they don't matter. When I finished, Derek, sitting off to the side with his lawyer, jumped up so fast his chair hit the floor. His voice cracked and he blurted out, "Fine, I resign. I don't want this job. I'm done," like that was going to save him. One of the federal lawyers stood up without even looking at him and said into the mic, "Mr. Lang, your resignation has no bearing on the federal charges you are still going to trial." And you could see it hit him that there was no easy exit door here. After me, the stories came. A young black woman talked about being shoved against a squad car hood by Derek for jaywalking on her own block. An older black man described Derek yanking him out of his car when he dared to ask why he'd been pulled over. A white neighbor stood up and admitted he'd watched Derek talk to black residents in ways he'd never used with him and never said a word, said, "I was wrong to stay quiet." And you could hear people murmuring, nodding, connecting dots that had been sitting there all along. Within days, Chief Marshal was out of his job. The department sent an email ending arrest quotas for productivity. Legal teams started quietly reaching out to some of the folks who'd filed complaints before offering settlements with a lot of fine print. And the local news did what the local news does, called it a step toward justice. Don't get me wrong, watching Derek lose that badge and knowing Marshall wasn't sitting in that big office anymore, that was satisfying in a way I can't lie about. But sitting on my porch afterward watching kids ride their bikes past my building, I kept thinking about a line I wrote in a report years ago. Money can patch a wound, but it can't change the hand that threw the punch. A check might help someone pay their bills, but it doesn't erase the memory of cold metal and hot breath in your ear. It doesn't erase the way strangers look away instead of stepping in. It doesn't erase the quiet fear that the next time there's no camera and no federal task force watching. A week or so later, I went back to Lakeview to buy groceries. Walked past that same pharmacy aisle, my heart beating a little faster, even though nothing was happening, and I caught a woman staring at me over a basket of cereal. She gave me a small nod and said, "Ms. Bennett, thank you." Just like that, nothing fancy. And it hit me that somewhere between that shelf and that city hall hearing, this stopped being just my story. It became a mirror. People were holding up to their own lives. So now I'm holding that mirror out to you, listening to this, wherever you are. I want you to really think about this and tell me in the comments, do you believe what happened to me and to those other folks at that hearing was just a couple of bad officers and a weak chief? Or do you see something deeper in it, something about the way we treat certain bodies in certain neighborhoods? Do you think ending quotas and firing a few people is real justice, or is it just new paint on old cracks? Have you ever been profiled, followed around a store, pulled over for a reason that didn't quite make sense, or stood there and watched it happen to somebody else because you were scared to step in? I want to hear your stories, your anger, your disagreement, if you have it, all of it, because until we can actually talk about what power looks like when it goes wrong, nothing really changes. So drop your thoughts below. Tell me what you think justice looks like in a world where a grandma buying vitamins can end up on the floor with her arm twisted. Because I can tell you my side, but this conversation, this fight over what kind of country we really are, that belongs to all of us now.